Hey there, welcome back to another video. This time around, it is a review of the 1986 horror film, Vamp. Ever have one of those nights? This is a cult classic for a lot of people. This has a cult following, and after seeing it, I can understand why. I thought this was a legitimate gem, a nice diamond in the rough for the horror genre, especially for the genre of vampire films. This is a film that would definitely have a lot of elements from it lifted for films like From Dusk Till Dawn. So much so that Tarantino knew it. Tarantino knew that his film was borrowing from Vamp. So much so that he actually asked the producer, Donald P. Borchers, who had the rights for Vamp, he asked him for permission. He said, hey, I'm asking you because, and I want you to produce it, but at the same time, I don't want you to sue me because I know that there's a lot of similarities with my plot line and my setup from Dusk Till Dawn and Vamp. And that was intentional and deliberate because that was where he came up with the idea from Dusk Till Dawn. He saw Vamp and then he had an idea for what would become From Dusk Till Dawn. I would say I personally think From Dusk Till Dawn is a better movie, but I still have a good amount of love for Vamp. I think it's a vivacious, really fun, fast-paced movie. It's got some genuine moments of really jaw-dropping sexuality. It's got some nice bits of gore here and there, although it's not really the most gory film. I think it could have benefited from some more in that particular area. It's got some solid performances by most of the cast, including Grace Jones in an unforgettable role as Katrina, and more underrated work by other actors like Robert Rusler, Chris Makepeace, and Deedee Pfeiffer. You also have like an early role by Billy Drago as this leader of this albino gang, and he was fantastic, but he was really underused in this. I thought he was a vampire. I thought he and his whole crew were vampires. I think one of them was, but not all of them were vampires. It was a little confusing how they handled that, but I'll get to that later. I also like Sandy Barron as Vic, I think, which is a role that was originally going to be Jerry Lewis, but Jerry Lewis was taking advice from a psychic of all people, and he said like the only people who are gonna watch this movie if you're in it are people in France. So I guess he was like, I'm not gonna do it now. I guess because fuck the French. I don't. I don't understand. And what's interesting is that the Vamp was honestly really successful in France, but it still made some money in the U.S. I mean, it's a film that only cost about 3.3 million, and it wound up making I think 16 million in the worldwide box office. It made 4.9 in the U.S. and it ultimately did fairly well on home video to boot. Now, Vamp is directed by a first-time director in Richard Wenk. Before this, he had done a little short film that he did for a college project called Dracula Bites the Big Apple. I believe that was what it was called. And that actually was bought and optioned by HBO back in the day and used to air quite a bit. It's actually included as a special feature on this release by Arrow Video. And I wasn't really, I mean, I had some fun with it, but I can see why it didn't leave much of a mark. I can see why it didn't leave a very much of an impression on a lot of people. But that being said, it kind of got his foot in the door when it comes to Hollywood. And I think he had worked in other areas in the industry before he ultimately got the shot to direct Vamp. And for a first-time director, I thought he really sunk his teeth into this and really got the most blood out of it. It was really impressive from when you look at it from a multitude of different ways. Not only because it's his first film that he's directed, but because it's also a genre he's not particularly that fond of. He admitted in interviews, in the interview on this Blu-ray, that he's not really a big fan of the horror genre. So for Richard Wenk to come in and still make a genuinely good horror film, despite the fact that it's not really one of his favorite genres, and it's his first film, and still put the same amount of passion into the project that he would have if it was a genre that he personally preferred, is definitely noteworthy. As is the fact that he also wrote the film. So he wrote the movie, he wrote the story, which is a genre he's not particularly that into, and still put the same passion into writing the story and writing the different aspects of the overall plot. I thought he did a really good job focusing things on this relationship between the two friends and Keith and AJ, and the phrase, I'm trying to think of the right word. Phrase might not be the right word, but, the cracks in the relationship that form because AJ is now a vampire. He's the living dead. And there's a really compelling scene where AJ is trying to get his friend to kill him because he's so hungry, and he's afraid that he's going to kill his friend. So there's some really good moments in the film that are genuinely compelling, and that's a good example of that. And then on top of that, it just has this vivaciousness and this verve that is very captivating. And a lot of it is due to Wank's direction. I thought his direction was honestly quite impressive, especially from a lighting standpoint. I love the way this film was lit with all these different lurid colors, greens and purples and pinks, and it just really gave it a very unique look to the overall film. And also, for a first-time director, he handled the set really well, and it was a difficult set. Grace Jones would come out of her trailer whenever she felt like it. She decided on a whim to go to Paris one day and went missing. And the people who were financing the film were almost ready to pull the plug unless they got her back on set. So he had to deal with that. I mean, Grace Jones, she really was living her life, to say the least. I mean, she actually was involved in a threesome with two women, I think one other guy, and I think so it was actually more of an orgy. And there was and one of the girls was, I think it was a guy and a girl, and one of the girls that she was banging was this woman this Playboy Playmate who was on the FBI most wanted list at the time because of drug trafficking. So you're just like, oh my God. And on top of that, Grace Jones was such a serious actress that she made herself nocturnal for the shoot because she's playing a vampire. So she deemed herself nocturnal, so you had to deal with that. And if that isn't bad enough, Wenk and other crew members, maybe it wasn't Wenk, but I know a lot of other crew members, they wound up getting really sick from some kind of parasite or bacteria and wound up in the hospital shitting themselves. You had a crew member who got stabbed on the set. You had Deedee Pfeiffer had her car stolen. It's just one thing after another when it comes to this movie. Wenk had the hardest time finding anyone who would pay, or anyone that he could afford to pay to build the sets for this movie. So that was a chore. It's a minor miracle. It's not a minor miracle. It's a major miracle. This film was even finished, let alone turned out as good as it ultimately did because of all these different factors that were totally out of the cast and the crew's control. But yeah, Richard Wenk, I really thought he did a really wonderful job directing the film. The script I also thought was fairly solid too. There's a lot of different elements that I liked about it. I didn't think it was as funny as it could have been. There were some really, fun moments. Like originally the dance sequence with Katrina, when you're first introduced to Grace Jones and her character in the film, it was supposed to be this really sexy, sensuous scene, and Grace Jones went a more artistic route, and it completely changed what Wenk had in mind. So he rolled with it and he put in the live reactions of the extras in that scene because they didn't know what was going to happen either. So they see Grace Jones do her weird dance where she's just like, timid and freaked out and looks like she's, on all kinds of fucking drugs. And their reaction of just their slack-jawed reaction is perfect. And it really was a nice touch. And honestly, someone needs to turn that into a GIF, because that's like the perfect GIF for like a what the fuck moment where you're just like, what the fuck was that? And then they look around and like, oh man. Yeah, I thought that was a really a well done sequence. But there are a few other lines that made me chuckle. Most of them came from Gedde Wantanabe's character Duncan, and some stuff with Sandy Barron's character Vic. But I didn't feel it was as funny as it could have been if they're trying to go for a dark comedy sort of swirl into the mix. I didn't really feel that it was really as funny as it could have been. At the same time, I think it was a mistake to advertise this as a comedy. Like the main tagline is a frightening comedy, and I don't really think that really suits this film, because it's not really a comedy. It's more of a horror film than it is a comedy. Transylvania 65000, that's a comedy with horror elements. This is a horror film with comedic elements. So yeah, I liked Wenk's approach to the characters. I liked the fact that Deedee Pfeiffer's character in Amaretto, she's just a character she's a little bit ditzy, but it's not to the point where it's offensive or too unflattering. And she had this sweetness about her, and I like the fact that her ditziness doesn't necessarily come from the fact that she's not intelligent. It comes from the fact that she just is awestruck and in love with this boy. Like, her whole character, the whole time, throughout the whole film, she's just trying to get Keith to recognize her and to realize that she's madly in love with him. I mean, what guy wouldn't want that kind of scenario? And also, she was sexy and cute, and what a lucky guy. Like, it's one of those things where, that would be so cool to have a girl fall over you like that, fall all over you like that, versus, the opposite. Most of the time in this kind of relationship, it's the opposite. So it's a refreshing a change of pace to have the girl falling head over heels for the guy instead of vice versa. Now, this film does have a good amount of TNA, and there are a lot of times where this feels like it's just a softcore porn with some gore and vampires. But I'm not going to complain that much. But it does kind of have that sort of vibe. But that's intentional because it takes place in a strip club. That's really what the whole deal is. I thought Roger Ebert really put the film and the overall story and what Wenk was trying to go for the best, and Wenk felt the same way when Roger Ebert said that it was like After Hours, but with vampires. And honestly, it is very similar to After Hours, Scorsese's film, when it comes to the overall approach to things. The horror elements, though, aren't quite... They're not bad. It's just... I wanted more of them. Especially when you have Greg Kinneam's really amazing practical effects. Like, he did a marvelous job with the makeup effects in this film, and he would go on to do a lot of different stuff, including winning an Oscar for Bram Stoker's Dracula. And in this film, so you can see a little bit of a precursor to kind of what he would do with Bram Stoker's Dracula. And I think he also might have worked on The Lost Boys as well. So, I like the look of the vampires. It's different. It's unique. Particularly Katrina. But other than like a heart getting ripped out of somebody's chest, some blood that sprays when necks get bit, or, you know, a few little things here and there, it doesn't really deliver the goods when it comes to the gore front. It seems a little paltry when it comes to that. Might have been something to do with the low budget, or just the fact that Wenk, just that wasn't really his cup of tea. And I felt that the film really ran out of steam. It became a little anemic by the climax because there wasn't a whole lot you know, it's not like it was bad in terms of the pacing. It was still going at a good pace. There was still a lot of blood flowing through its veins, but it just felt like it just kind of lost steam and lost energy by the climax. And it doesn't help either that it just seems like Katrina just shows up out of nowhere, and just because it's the ending of the movie and she needs to be there. And it was really kind of hard to tell that it was her, because she has a completely different look than she did earlier. She's just bald, completely bald-headed. She doesn't have the striking wig that she had on earlier. Doesn't have any of these other this other appearance that she had throughout the rest of the movie. So I kind of did a double take for a little bit. I'm like, is that Katrina? And then eventually, okay, it is. She gets shot in the mouth with an arrow by Keith, and the climax is just her like slowly trying to stumble after him, and he shoots arrows at the boards that are preventing the sunlight from coming into this underground lair, and she gets dispatched that way. And I thought it was a little too easy for a character that was established as being this thousands of year old vampire queen. It just felt like she was dispatched way too easily, and I didn't feel that they really handled that the best, if you ask me. And also, there wasn't really any like cool melting stuff. Like, she fell on the ground and there's like some black skin that kind of melts a little bit, but then you don't really see much of, you know, anything really with that. There's a whole I guess their big gag is the skeleton flipping Keith and the girl off, and sadly, in this version of the film, you can see a crew member lifting the skeleton arm and positioning it to give the middle finger, so it does break the illusion. But yeah, I felt the climax really could have been a lot better. Ultimately, I like the film, but I don't love it because of the climax. I think it's just everything up to that point I was really into, and then it's like the blood just got cut, you know, like a vein got cut and blood just started spewing everywhere, and it just became a kind of a shell of what it was building up to, of what I thought it could have been. That being said, there was also some other things too, like for instance, AJ, they had a really cool concept going with his character, and they killed him, and then he comes back last minute to deliver like a what's supposed to be a killing blow to Katrina, but it doesn't really kill her. And it's insinuated that he's gonna live on. He's gonna hide in the sewers, and he's still gonna maintain his friendship with Keith. And I'm like, that's more interesting. Can we have more of that? Like, we should have had more of that sort of dynamic of him trying to curb his vampire instincts and still help his friends get out of this night of terror. But it just seemed like a wasted opportunity in that particular regard. Also, another wasted opportunity, Billy Drago is Snow. Like, he should have had more to do. He should have been a bigger part of the movie. He was fucking scary. Like, he was honestly scarier than Katrina to me. Like, his albino character, the way that he portrayed it, like, that is a guy you don't want to meet in a dark alley. You don't want to meet him, period. And I feel that they just didn't really do that character justice, or his gang. And it was kind of confusing, like I said, like, are they vampires? Are they not vampires? And it seems like they were just there to set up a few different moments with Chris Makepeace having to stay one step ahead of them, and to set up that admittedly pretty gonzo sequence where there's a little girl vampire who's gnawing on one of the gang members' arms. But it seems a little wasted, if you ask me, in terms of potential with the particular gang. Should have had more for them to do, or should have made it more clear that they were vampires. I think the production design is pretty effective, especially and efficient, especially for such a low budget and for such a short time for them to work with. It was a very short amount of time for the set designers and everybody to work on the film. I felt that the cinematography was also really impressive by Elliot Davis. I thought and Douglas F. O'Neon's. I thought they really worked quite well with the director Richard Wenk and really bringing his vision to life. I felt it was excellently edited by Mark Grossman. There really isn't a moment in the film where it feels like it was edited poorly. Going back to Richard Wenk, I really want to hammer home the point that it is a very good job in terms of directing. There's a lot of energy to the direction, and there's a lot of unique camera work and techniques. There's a shot where they're in a car and it's spinning out, but the entire camera is spinning with it. There's a lot of moments like that where the camera is alive and it's moving, and it does have some Dutch angles and does have some other stuff like that, but it actually does accentuate what's on screen. It doesn't detract from it. It doesn't become distracting. And I would be totally remiss if I didn't mention Jonathan Elias's absolutely phenomenal, just spectacular score. I love this score. It takes the film and raises it to a whole other level that it would not be at without his score. It's atmospheric, it's moody, it's catchy. It really does a good job making certain sequences that are supposed to be suspenseful or creepy, even more suspenseful or creepy. It does an equally good job with sequences that are supposed to be tense or really get your blood pumping. And on top of that, you also have some legitimately good songs. In particular, one of them was the one that was used in the dance sequence with Grace Jones, where she's doing her strange, surreal dance with this statue, which, by the way, another bit of trivia, the statue that she dry humps in the middle of the stage, the body double that was used for that statue was Dolph Lundgren. So she's dry humping Dolph. She's dry humping Dolph Lundgren's body in the middle of the stage in Vamp. I thought that was a fun bit of trivia because at the time she was dating Dolph Lundgren. So, yeah. there's a lot of things about this film that I genuinely liked, and one of them was definitely that score. And I liked the song that was used in that particular scene, the dance scene. It's really too bad that the full version of that is not really available, other than this version of it that Grace did years later, but it's not really the same song. And I don't know about the other songs and whether or not they were readily accessed or easily accessible. And of course, I mentioned the cast before, but I might as well mention them again. Chris Makepeace, who I remember him from My Bodyguard, and I wasn't really a big fan of that, but I really liked him in this. He gave me a lot of Sean Astin vibes in this. And this is at the point in time when Sean Astin was really starting to come into his own, or he was really starting to get a lot of roles. Of course, in the year in 1985, you know, he did The Goonies. That was a huge film. So he it would honestly would have been fun to see Sean Astin in the Chris Makepeace role, but I still thought Chris Makepeace did a really good job. Robert Rusler, I always liked Robert Rusler. I've honestly felt that he deserved better. He just didn't seem to get a whole lot of stuff. It seemed like he was on the fast track. He was in Weird Science. He was in Nightmare on Elm Street 2. Then he was in this film, and then his career just kind of fizzled out, and I felt that was really too bad because I felt that he had a certain vibe to him that I thought was genuinely enjoyable, and I really liked seeing him work. And I thought that he and Chris Makepeace had great chemistry with one another. You could buy that they were really good buddies. That scene where they're in the car and they're singing "A Bad Case of Loving You," I really liked that scene. Partly because I would do that kind of stuff all the time, you know, where you're dun, 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 you know. So it was really kind of, it was fun to see a group of some friends do the same kind of thing. Uh, Grace Jones, I mean, she is something else. She's always been something else. And she definitely did add a certain animalistic and really intense sexuality to this film that I don't think would be there without her involvement. I thought it was really good casting for her to play a ancient vampire queen. I just wish that she had more to do in the climax. Deedee Pfeiffer, this was her first big film, and you really couldn't tell because she seemed like a natural. And she's a big fan of this. She calls it her baby, and she should be a big fan of this, and she should be proud of what she did because I thought she did a really nice job with her role as Amaretto. And Gedde Wantanabe, he was essentially the comic relief. He was very hit and miss to me. Like, there were some moments where I did genuinely laugh at, you know, his over-the-top horniness and his lines. But there's other moments where he got a little bit on my nerves. And, of course, then you have Billy Drago and Sandy Barron. But yeah, pretty good cast for a film like this. And, I mean, like I said, it goes by at a pretty good pace. It doesn't take too long to really start to sink its teeth into you. 94 minutes doesn't really feel like it's dragging too much. I would say this is a film I definitely would recommend if you're a fan of Fright Night or Fright Night Part 2 or films like that. And I do feel it's a gem. I really do. I think Vamp is a genuinely good fright flick, and one of the better vampire films that I've seen. And I'm really glad that I was recommended to check it out, because I probably would have put this way down on my list, because I don't know, I guess something about it just seemed like, I guess the comedy aspect is a big reason why I kind of avoided it, because I find a lot of horror comedies to be pretty bad because it's a very hard thing to do. It's a very difficult formula to pull off, and I was really glad that it wasn't really much of a comedy. So I'm just more mad now at the advertisers for advertising the film the wrong way. Because it may honestly, if they advertised it better, it might have done it might have done better business. I think it still would have struggled because they put it up against Aliens. It didn't stand a chance in hell against that kind of competition in the box office. But at the end of the day, it's one of those movies where I'm glad it got made. I'm glad it's out there. And I don't really know what else to say about it other than thanks for watching my review of Vamp. And as always, I'll see you later. See ya.